Joining me today is Carl Za. He has his own podcast, the Silk and Steel podcast. He's going to join me today, and we're going to talk about the growing tensions around Taiwan between the United States and China. Thank you for joining me, Carl. Can you please introduce yourself, a little bit about your work, and then we can get into this whole topic.
Hey guys, I am Carl Za. I am a prolific shitposter on Twitter. I do run a podcast called the Silk and Steel Podcast, which is focused primarily on China and surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. I'm glad my notoriety got me an invite on Brian's show. So let's get the show started.
Yeah, we've actually appeared together before on Daniel Dumbrell's channel, but this is the first time you've been over here, and we're happy to have you. So let's talk about Taiwan. For people who, for whatever reason, don't know what's going on, there is incredible tension building over Taiwan. This is because the United States many people for some reason don't know that Taiwan is not a country. It is part of China. Every country on Earth basically recognizes Taiwan as part of China, even the United States, and we'll get into that in a moment. And yet the United States still treats Taiwan as some sort of independent country, and this is obviously going to cause tension because it is an infringement on China's sovereignty. With the recent visit of Nancy Pelosi, the Chinese government has used this as an opportunity to start incrementally moving everything back in the opposite direction, because for years and years, the United States has been incrementally eating away at China's sovereignty over Taiwan. Carl, from your perspective, how are you seeing this whole situation?
This when I was watching this coverage from United States, it seems like this is 1984, right? Black is white, peace, war is the peace is war. And because everything is inverted, they claim that China is causing unnecessary provocation, but it's totally opposite. It's Nancy Pelosi went on a $19 million photo op to Taiwan for whatever reason. She says she's there to support Taiwan, but exactly how does her visit help people on Taiwan or mainland China or American people back home? That's very unclear. And what is clear is that tension has raised dramatically because of her visit. Before her visit, everything is fine. The trade is going brisk between Taiwan and mainland China. In fact, somewhere between 40 to 60% of Taiwan's exports goes to mainland China. And out of an island of 25 million people, 2 million Taiwanese people actually study, live, and work on mainland. So it's under such circumstance, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, she's not going there as a private citizen. She's going there in her capacity as Speaker of the House, which is third ranking member of the U.S. administration. If something were to happen to Biden and Kamala Harris at the same time, Nancy Pelosi would be the president of the United States. And so she, in her official capacity, visited Taiwan, which United States itself recognized as part of China. And U.S. only recognized the government in Beijing as a sole legitimate representative of China. And yet what Pelosi is doing is walk back from U.S. commitment to its one China policy since 1970, since Nixon visited China. This is during 1972 when Nixon visited China, he signed the Shanghai Communique with then Premier Zhou Enlai in Shanghai, which state that U.S. government acknowledged that Chinese on both sides of Taiwan Strait recognize that Taiwan is an issue. It's an issue to be resolved among the Chinese people from both sides of the Taiwan Strait, and basically, U.S. acknowledge it is a China domestic matter to be resolved by Chinese people amongst themselves, and that formed the basis for the future Sino-American relationship going forward from the normalization in 1979 until today. But in the last few years, what we see is the U.S. administration has tried to walk back. Started with Trump administration sending the U.S. Marines to Taiwan under the pretense that the American Institute on Taiwan is a diplomatic compounder for merits marine protection. I don't know what they're protecting it from, but it was just a design to provoke a reaction from China. Again, this is the same thing with the Pelosi's trip. All Pelosi has done is so she can pose to the American media like, look, I stood up to the big bad China. Look how brave I am. Oh, by the way, it's midterm election coming up soon, so make sure you make donations to my re-election committee. And don't worry about what me and my husbands are doing with the stock manipulation because we're gonna start World War III right now. So this is what we're facing with, completely irresponsible American politicians out there for their own gain, and screw the consequences. Even if it's a World War III, thankfully World War III did not happen. I mean, China behaved a lot more rationally and a lot more cool-headed than I would myself would have liked. But we did not have World War III. Thanks for very measured, restrained approach of China in response to Pelosi's visit.
Do you think the United States is trying to provoke a conflict with China? Do you feel like they thought that over time they would be able to incrementally peel Taiwan away from China, that they're running out of time, and now they're becoming desperate and resorting to these very reckless courses of action? Is that how you see it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, many officials in U.S. administration thinks that right now U.S. have a very limited time window to do something to contain China's rise, because they know given time China will continually to grow its economy, you will increasingly grow powerful. So in 10-15 years time, Chinese economy would have reached the escape velocity at the point where even if US want to contain China, you would not be able to. So they felt like this is the time, if they want to do something about China's rise, it's now or never. And they never made any secret about it, because the U.S. Quote unquote diplomat, who's the deputy representative of U.S. at the American Institute in Taiwan, have given an interview in last year, 2021, and he said U.S. government no longer see Taiwan as a problem in its relationship between China. In fact, it's just the opposite. U.S. sees Taiwan as an asset. Now, asset for what? Right? It's an asset. Taiwan is an asset for provoking China into doing something where U.S. would apply its military to reassert its hegemony in Western Pacific. That's a whole plan all along. And I'm very thankful China did not take the bait. China had handled this in a lot more responsible adult manner. Like I had fully expected China to at least send a military fighter jet escort for Pelosi's planes to land on Taiwan. But that didn't happen because U.S. military has said they would send their own fighter escort for Pelosi. And when Chinese and U.S. fighter jet in such a close proximity, accident could happen, So it's actually very responsible for Chinese government not to send a fighter escort to escort her into the Taiwan airspace. They waited after she left, then started the military exercise all around Taiwan Island. So this is quite measured and also quite firmly assert Chinese sovereignty, because they conduct their military exercise in some areas within 9 nautical miles within the Taiwan coast. Because by the international treaties, the 12 nautical mile within any coast is defined as territorial water. So China is in the territorial water, which it claims as its own, right? This is our water, our sovereignty. So we're holding our military exercise right now. And there was a very muted response from Washington, because they knew they're the one who are basically cause of this. This would not have happened if Pelosi did not visit Taiwan, spending 90 million U.S. taxpayers' money to do basically a photo op.
Yeah, so a lot of people were disappointed. And a lot of people also said that, look, Beijing is doing these military drills. They're throwing a tantrum because they couldn't stop Nancy Pelosi from visiting. I've heard a lot of people ask me, Brian, how is Taiwan a part of China if China can't stop Nancy Pelosi from landing on Taiwan? As if the U.S. violating international law somehow voids international law. No, not really. And what's interesting is that a lot of people in the West are starting to realize that these military exercises, they're not a tantrum. They were thought out quite thoroughly. They were planned for quite a while, and they were just using this as an excuse. This was their answer for continued U.S. provocations they knew were going to continue. And now what they're doing is, like I said before, they're incrementally reasserting their sovereignty, full sovereignty over Taiwan. And every provocation that the U.S. commits to from here on out is going to be responded to through this manner. And I just saw an article where I think this New York Times article, U.S. insists it will operate around Taiwan despite China's pressure. And they said, let's see, what did they say? Within a few weeks, officials said the U.S. Navy is planning to run ships through the Taiwan Strait, ignoring China's recent claim that it controls the entire waterway. Officials said they would not send the Ronald Reagan, the Japan-based aircraft carrier, because it would be too provocative. But I think anything the U.S. does in this situation is going to be provocative. It's going to give Beijing another excuse to, again, incrementally reassert themselves over Taiwan, to avoid direct confrontation, but continue this process. How do you see these military exercises?
Well, U.S. is obviously playing a game of chicken here. You know, like they actually 25 years ago, you know, the last time a Speaker of the House from U.S. visited Taiwan, you know, Newt Gingrich, just before his visit, U.S. did send aircraft carriers through Taiwan Strait. You know, of course, back in 1997, you know, China was a lot weaker economically and militarily compared is today. There's a reason USS Ronald Reagan stayed away as opposed to 25 years ago. One reason is, you know, the US even knows that it's not a show of intimidation anymore. In fact, you know, China has so many missiles on the other side of the Taiwan Strait that could easily kill a carrier force. So sending a carrier through in the target zone is not it's not a gesture of intimidation like it was back in 1997 when China had no response to that type of behavior. And again, I want to respond to the people who were disappointed in kind of lack of stronger Chinese reaction to the Nancy Pelosi's visit. The whole point of, you know, you're not supposed to fight a battle at your enemy's choosing and at a battleground that your enemy chose, right? Because right now, U.S. is the one that's trying to provoke China to do a stronger military response that then U.S. can respond to. China is not taking that bait. Why would China want to rush into a military confrontation with U.S. when just giving few more years, Chinese position is growing stronger and stronger? It's a U.S. that can't wait. U.S. is the one that recognizes, oh my God, we have 10-year time window. It's now or never. China can wait 10 years. That's fine. China will be much, much stronger than it is today 10 years from now. And so, again, you know, China choose its response very wisely, I would say. You don't want to rush into a battle at your enemy's schedule. You don't want to fall into the U.S. trap of provoking you into a war. What China is doing, like you say, is incrementally asserting its sovereignty in stronger terms. Back in 1997, 1996, it might be missile tests, but mostly it's just around the Taiwan Strait. But now it's all over the Taiwan island. You know, if you look at the military exercise area published by the Chinese military, it's exactly around the Taiwan island and where they would be if they were to do a naval blockade. right? So China is now openly practicing that. Now, this would not have been possible. Well, if China had carried out this military exercise without a Nancy Pelosi visit, you will hear like uproar in the Western media about how provocative, how aggressive China is. It's totally uncalled for. But now, because everybody was expecting World War III, and then after China, didn't take the bait, then carry out their long planned military, like you mentioned, military exercise on this scale is not something you can snap. You can like assemble together within few days. This has been planned out months in advance. Probably back when Nancy Pelosi first announced her intent to visit Taiwan, but that time she delayed it, claiming she had COVID. Right, so which gave China like few months to prepare leading up to this, and now it presents them a perfect opportunity to carry this exercise and with muted U.S. response, because U.S. know it itself is the one that provokes this, and people should be thankful there's no World War III, because China has responded very calmly and in an adult manner.
Yeah, and if you could achieve your objective without fighting at all, that's even better. So if China could reunify Taiwan completely with the rest of China without ever having to get into a conflict in the first place, that would be best of all. And I think there's a little bit of that within the reasoning of all this. So this planned U.S. transit of the Strait, this upcoming transit they say they will do to assert themselves, do you think that it's another World War III possibility, or is this going to be another way to just give Beijing a reason to justify further incremental assertions over Taiwan?
So this is not the first time U.S. has sent a military assets through the Taiwan Strait. Just like last year, not aircraft carrier. U.S. will send in some destroyer, whatever is through the Taiwan Strait. It's just a very highly symbolic move. Just like they send in their naval assets through South China Sea. Again, this is a regular occurrence. It's just like how U.S. constantly send out spy planes to bust the Chinese coast. This is not something that's unforeseen by China. This is not. Again, China has shown itself it will not take the bait. With the Pelosi visit, it's not going to treat this sail through any differently. I mean, this sail through is pretty regular occurrence now in the last few years. Ever since Hillary Clinton's pivot to Asia back in 2011. U.S. have been doing this. It's the pivot to Asia is not economic. It's all military. It's about pivoting military asset to East Asia. So this is nothing new for China.
Yeah. So I really do. I think they're going to use it as an excuse to continue incrementally asserting their sovereignty over Taiwan again. Do you know of any concrete steps that China can take to go beyond what they're doing right now? Right now, they're crossing these symbolic lines that China was respecting just to avoid escalation, that they have every right to cross over if they wanted to. You have the air defense identification zone, which actually extends over China's actual land. It's ridiculous. But when they fly through it in such a way that when they enter it, they're going in a direction that will never actually reach Taiwan Island. So it's the least provocative way they can do that. And now they're crossing over the middle of the strait. That was a symbolic line. They're completely flying anywhere they want inside the air defense identification zone. There was a drone that actually flew over one of the islands the administration in Taiwan claims. What do you think is the next step after this? Are they going to land on some of these lesser islands that the administration in Taipei claim?
Yeah, I mean, some people suggested maybe China would take a couple of these offshore islands that Taiwan control, just a couple kilometers off the mainland Chinese coast. I'm talking about the island of Kinmen and Mazu. But I don't see that happening because these islands are already pretty pro-China. Kinmen rely on the mainland Chinese tourists for its tourism. Tourism is one of the big main economic stay on Kinmen. Back before the pandemic, every October during the Chinese National Day, Kinmen would hang out all the PRC flag alongside with the so-called ROC flag on the street to welcome the mainland Chinese tourists. So like they're the most pro, mainland China population under Taiwan control. So it's like there's not much point to military take that over. Because if China is going to make a move, it's going to be off or nothing. It's not going to be like we'll just take a couple offshore islands to send a message. No, because if China makes a military move, there will be corresponding response from U.S. and it's a ladder escalation, right? So if China going to make a move when China is ready, when China is going to make a move for the whole enchilada, but not like just settle for a couple offshore islands. I don't think.
Okay, so I was thinking maybe a bit, but you explain that maybe they could just like symbolically put a garrison there for, to, maybe an engineering team or something to help the people there, but just a way of demonstrating their sovereignty over.
One thing that could happen is China send its Coast Guard into Taiwan waters. That's because this is something we have seen with the Chinese and Japanese territorial dispute around the Diaoyu Island, or what the Japanese call the Sengaku Islands. After World War II, Japan was supposed to give up all its former colonies, all its territory acquired from China, from Korea, etc. But the caveat was the Diaoyu Islands were used by the U.S. military as a targeting practice, and so Chiang Kai-shek, because he relied on U.S. support, he did not raise any objection. Then in 1972, when U.S. returned sovereignty of the Ryukyu Islands, Okinawa, to Japan, they also handed over the control of Diaoyu Islands, which U.S. military had used for target practice, to the Japanese administration. That basically was origin of this dispute between China and Japan. But for a long time, China was content to have this dispute, but not sending military force over there to enforce its claims. Until 2011, 2012, Japan engineered this political maneuver to somehow make the landowner, the supposedly landowner on the island, to sell the island to the Japanese government. And after that, China had to make a response. So China sent its Coast Guard to patrol the waters of Diaoyu Islands. And that changed the equation, because previously only the Japanese Coast Guard were in the area. Now it became ineffectively was co-administered by the both countries' Coast Guard now. Something like that could happen because there's a precedence for that. I can see China sending Coast Guards to some of the waters that currently patrolled by the Taiwan administration. So we could see that.
That's interesting. When you look at the map and you see where China was conducting these exercises, I mean, it was pretty much a direct invasion for the main island. There were no, I didn't see any exercises on the map regarding these islands, even ones with airports that could potentially be used in a conflict. So yeah, maybe there is something to that all or nothing approach if any sort of military option was finally used. And when let's maybe talk about this right here. This is from Army University Press, Near Peer China, Understanding the Chinese Military, and it's over a 43-minute long, I guess you could call it a documentary, where they have all of these experts in the military, in U.S. policymaking circles, talking about China's military rise. And there's a couple of things here that I want to ask your reaction to, because I think this is a good indicator of how Americans are thinking about this, the Americans involved in making decisions regarding China. And this will all have an impact on anything that unfolds regarding to Taiwan. So the perception of history, and I know, Carl, this is an area of expertise for you, history, especially regarding China. Well, one of the first things they said was that China perceives itself as a great power throughout history. Like they're imagining that they were a great power, that actually they weren't, but that's what they think. And they want to restore this great power status in modern times.
China perceives that historically they've been a great and powerful nation, one of the, if not the most powerful nations in the world. This was largely shaken by a historical period they call the Century of Humiliation, basically from the First Opium War to the rise of the current PRC. They want to return to that status, and they've had a number of ways they've captured that. Xi Jinping called it the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and they've set 2049, the centenary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, to reach this great rejuvenation. And what they want is for the People's Republic of China to hold a preeminent global position across a whole broad spectrum of endeavors.
Carl, was China a great power, or is it just in their imagination?
I don't think it's I don't think this is even disputed that China was the preeminent power in East Asia for thousands of years. I mean, there was no other country of a similar stature that existed around that time. It's only until 19th century, really, because the Industrial Revolution first happened in England, and so that really propelled the European powers to become the big imperialist powers all around the world. But before that, there was really no competition for China in East Asia. So yeah, it's not imaginary.
Yeah, so they're not getting off to a good start. They also said that Mao Zedong, he was just in the right place at the right time. There was nothing, special about him. He wasn't really that smart or anything. Everyone around him that was qualified died, and he was the last guy left, and they just made him the leader.
The rise of the communist movement can go back to at least 1921. That's when the party was formed. Mao was an early adherent to communist philosophy, but he didn't rise to prominence at the outset. He was just one of many. It would later be more the responsibility of Red Army losses that led to Mao's elevation to the position that he eventually enjoyed. His military prowess wasn't terribly great. He was more of a political thinker than a military thinker. And he had actually been demoted at one point due to not so great Red Army performance. However, later defeats, when he was not in charge, actually helped re-elevate him to a leadership position. And then from a historical hindsight kind of perspective, he was elevated later to having a military prowess that really he wasn't deserving of, but he served as a focal point for uniting the people behind the idea of communism.
What do you say to that claim?
Yeah, so I mean, there's something to be said about the limitation of the great man theory of history, but in Mao's particular case, they could just point to somebody who could play a similar role. I just don't see it. I mean, you can point to alternative, who would take his place. I don't think anybody would argue that the role that Mao played in the early 20th century is pretty unique and irreplaceable, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that whatever anyone thinks, he was definitely qualified for some of the most important aspects of leadership, especially at that time. It was not an easy time to get through. A lot of hard decisions had to be made. They also said that the communists played little to no role fighting the Japanese during the Japanese occupation of China.
They actually don't do a whole lot against the Japanese for long periods of time.
That's funny that this is coming from the U.S. military right now, because that was not the U.S. military assessment during the World War II. During the World War II, U.S. military, especially the U.S. Army, has a big proponent of using the communist force to counter the Japanese, because they have they were pretty disillusioned with the Chiang Kai-shek's forces, with the corruption and the ineptness of the KMT. That's why U.S. Army actually had sent a Dixie, what's called Dixie mission to Yan'an, to the communist headquarters, to coordinate with Mao on how to better defeat the Japanese. If they thought the communists played no role, they would not have gone through this trouble. This is, the Dixie mission went down for for over a year, from I think 1944 to beyond to 1945. So this is a evaluation of U.S. military personnel who were on the ground, in World War II versus these these paper pushers nowadays.
Yeah,
I mean,
they are. Absolutely. And I've actually seen older documentaries. When I was growing up, I watched a lot of military documentaries, and I always remember them saying, the KMT, they were saving their weapons for after World War II so they could use them against the communists. And this frustrated the United States, and this is why they were also sending weapons to the communists. If they weren't using them to fight, what were they using them for? So it just defies common sense. It's strange, this schizophrenic nature of the U.S. military. Now they're saying, they didn't do anything because it suits them now. And that's not a good way to be driving policy. It's to be driving it with all these false conclusions. Now, here's something else that they said. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but they said the Chinese military was making all of these advances over the last couple of decades at like a breakneck pace. And now suddenly they've kind of slowed down. And they suggest this isn't because, they've reached the limit of human technology at this time. They're the ones kind of pushing it along, but because they ran out of intellectual property to steal.
So where the Chinese are at now, if you picture it as kind of a graph of technology, of capability, they're starting to reach the cutting edge in a lot of ways. So that line where it was going up very quickly for a long time, it's starting to level off now because they're no longer able to do things like steal technologies from other countries because the technology doesn't exist anywhere yet. So it effects like that, the rapidity of their development is starting to slow down.
What do you think about that?
Okay, this is it's almost like some Reddit author is now writing for the US for the Pentagon. They got a stipend now for the Pentagon to write for them. I mean, it's almost this is like a meme. I mean, if anything, if for serious military watchers of the PLA development, they could tell. Recently, China has been building advanced missile destroyers at a very rapid rate. Type 055. The U.S. In fact, U.S. military they are now. If anything, now they're trying to do what China is doing. There's the latest prototype. What U.S. is going to roll out their latest missile destroyer. If you compare that with the schematics of the PLA's Type 055, you will see a very similar profile. I mean, can you say U.S. is copying China? I mean, at some point, airplanes you need to have wings, right? I mean, there's certain aerodynamic principles you're all operating under. Just because both airplane have two wings, it does not necessarily mean one is a copy of the other, right? I mean, this is pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's no doubt China probably benefited, in the last 20 years to learn from advanced techs from all across the world, including from US. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But today to claim that somehow because they ran out of the technology to steal from US, so they're slowing down, that's blatantly untrue. Because now, if anything, now we're seeing at some in some specific field, China has already reached parity, and if not, even surpassing United States, like supersonic missiles, right? I mean, the hypersonic missiles, that China and also Russia is developing. That's something U.S. doesn't have. So I mean, I don't know what these guys are. This is pretty sad because, like, first, I mean, we tend to, in U.S., because we're so conditioned by Cold War propaganda, we tend to think, the Chinese leadership are driven by all these kind of ideological. Everything is ideological. But in fact, nowadays, it's a U.S. that's much more ideological than China. China is pretty practical. It's very pragmatic in its development. It's a U.S. like now everything is have to be framed in terms of before it's anti-communism. Now is to spread so-called liberal world order, right? Which is just another code word for preserving the U.S. hegemony. But people actually buy into that, so it's crazy.
It's interesting because right after this one expert claimed that, there was another expert that came on and said, the Chinese are making all of these advances with hypersonic missiles. They've got the biggest and best arsenal of missiles on Earth. Like, how could you do that if you were depending on others to steal from and just making copies? How did you manage to surpass anyone else? So their own experts are contradicting each other on this claim. And just like you said, the United States, not just with China, but also with Russia, they have to reconfigure their whole military to potentially fight either or both after 20 plus years of fighting these other interventions everywhere else against countries with no standing army or very deficient standing armies. Now they're readjusting to this. So they don't even have equivalents to a lot of the systems that Russia and China have. So you're absolutely right. And even their own other expert contradicted them on that. It's quite amazing. And this missile arsenal that China has is what's going to give them the advantage over the United States in any potential conflict fought along or within Chinese territory. And this is the other, I guess this is the other thing that they end on. They're talking about, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when the United States and China clash. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And another expert weighed in. They actually said one of the only sensible things that I heard during this entire video.
The question remains, will America make that attitudinal adjustment that's necessary to live in a future world at peace, albeit competitive world, but at peace?
And I say this every single video I do about China. I say that China has a bigger population, over 4 times the population of the US. They're well educated. They graduate millions more in essential fields related to technology, military technology contributing to the economy. They will definitely have a bigger economy and a corresponding military. The United States shouldn't even be trying to stop China from surpassing it. It doesn't make any sense. It's a completely irrational point to start from, and everything built on top of that is likewise irrational. What do you think about this necessity of the U.S. to try to contain China? Is it possible? Is it even, does it make any sense at all to you?
Why? Why? I mean,
exactly.
Like people are in U.S. Some politic hacks are trying to present China as some kind of existential threat to U.S. China is not existential threat to U.S. China does not see U.S. as existential threat to China, and the only possible Chinese threat is a threat to the U.S. hegemony. U.S. will no longer be number one. But we have that. People in U.S. have so wedded to the idea that USA number one. It's almost impossible for them to conceive U.S. as a number 2 power. But in real terms, what does it mean for average Americans if China surpassed United States? I mean, is it really worth to start World War III and it's possibly nuclear apocalypse just because we don't want to see China to propel itself to world's number 1 economy like it has been for the last 2,000 years before the last 200 years, right? I mean, like that's crazy. If you only thing they're trying to preserve is a U.S. hegemony. They're not even trying to preserve American way of life, because China growing wealthier it just means they can buy more U.S. product. They will have more consumption power to purchase U.S. goods. That's not detrimental to the U.S. people. Because the average U.S. people, really, China is so far away, from their ordinary lives. Nowadays China is just used as some kind of boogeyman, as China is going to eat our lunch, right? Well, that's because our leaders are not investing in education, not investing in infrastructure, not investing in healthcare. Instead, they spend $90 million on a photo op flying all the way up to Taiwan. That's why we can't have nice things in the United States. But this is the world we live in. Unfortunately, the people working in the military-industrial complex, they control all the corporate media. They pump out all these propaganda, brainwashing us of our need to come from China. Why? Why should we? They talk about the conflict as inevitable. They talk about the Thucydides trap. When the Sparta and the Athens fight for supremacy. Well, if you know it's a trap, don't fall into the trap. I mean, it's a very easy choice not to start a war. I mean, it's that simple. Just don't start a war that could potentially end the civilization as we know it. But then they're like, no, that is too much of risk. There's too much at stake. We have to defend American credibility. What are you talking about, man? How about fulfill your campaign promises, canceling the student debt or something. Do something useful.
Yeah. Things that Americans actually need.
Yes.
And it's interesting. This isn't the first time they've done this, but you were talking about U.S. hegemony being at threat, not actual, the territorial integrity of the United States, not its sovereignty, not its way of life, not the physical safety of Americans and America. And they always do this. They conflate national security with national interests. And they try to convince Americans that these natural interests are at the core of everything that America needs and should protect. When in reality, there are things that if it was the other way around, if it was China doing this, quoting Chinese interests to come halfway around the planet to meddle in Canada or Mexico, right on America's border or within American territory, or territory claimed by America, it would never be tolerated, not for a moment, and no one would believe for a second that was actually a core interest in terms of national security for China. And yet the other way around, for some reason, people buy into it.
Back in Cold War, when Khrushchev was about to place nuclear-capable missiles on Cuba, JFK almost pressed a nuclear button. We almost went to a nuclear war just because Soviet was going to place missiles on Cuba. But now Congress people in the U.S. are talking about supplying missiles to Taiwan. Hello.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's even worse because Cuba was a sovereign country at that time, and Taiwan is not. And even the U.S. says it is not. And it's amazing how many Americans you run into who honestly believe that China is bullying this country called Taiwan. They've never even checked the State Department's website to see what it says right now, let alone the communiques, which are even less ambiguous. I mean, they really spell it out. So how do you see all of this unfolding? I mean, it's impossible to predict, but what do you think is the next thing that we should be on the lookout for? Obviously, this planned transit of the Strait. Is there anything else?
I think there will be more U.S. military deployment to the Western Pacific. Right now, there's basically 3 aircraft carrier groups all around East China Sea. Right, there's the USS Ronald Reagan, and there's 2 what they call amphibious assault ships, which are basically light light carriers, which they have to reclassify because U.S. Congress at one point passed legislation to cap maximum amount of carriers U.S. military can have. So they reclassify all the light carrier as amphibious landing ships. And so, but right now we have all these military assets, military base all around China, and U.S. is also it's right now whole U.S. political establishment is so beholden to the military industrial complex. We sell billions of dollars worth of weapons to Taiwan. That's getting this is why all these congressmen are flying over to Taiwan. That's where they know where their wheels are getting greased. So I think there are going to be increasing levels of provocation coming from U.S. They're probably going to ratchet up the tension in hoping that China would take the bait to respond, and then U.S. have the excuse to start this their fantasy, the big air sea battle, like with all their conventional World War II style. Refighting the Pacific War. And I don't think China will take the bait because China is patient. China have been, China have not militarily forced a Taiwan solution for the last 70 years. You can easily afford to wait another 20 years. And in 20 years' time, like I already pointed out, 25 years ago, U.S. carrier can freely travel through the Taiwan Strait without fear of retaliation. Nowadays, they're very careful to keep USS Ronald Reagan away from the Taiwan Strait. And in 20 years' time, China is going to be even stronger than it is today. And even U.S. recognize that by that time, U.S. will not be able to contain China, and at least not by itself. That's how the whole idea of Quad came from, because U.S. realized you have to round up a bunch of allies in order to contain China, because U.S. would not be able to do it on its own. That's why they come up with this idea to form an alliance between Japan, Australia, and India to have this Quad. But we're seeing the Quad is already kind of in fray at this point, because U.S. is having a fall with India over over the Russian relations, and Japan was actually not very excited about the recent Pelosi visit, because they're the ones who are in the neighborhood. If there's actually going to be a war, Japan is not going to come out unscathed. So unlike United States is all the way across the Pacific Ocean. The war is going to fought in East Asia, and that this is why that a lot of these U.S. military planners are a lot more more adventurous. And so I think there will be increasing provocation from U.S. but I think China will be patient and continue to handle this in a responsible and adult manner. That's my prediction. Not very exciting, I know, for a lot of listeners, but I think that's also best for the rest of us. That means no World War III.
Yeah. Well, you live in the region. I live in the region, and I don't want to be at the epicenter of World War III. And it's funny because the U.S. always claims that they're underwriting, trade throughout the region, but it's really trade with China that they would supposedly be protecting, and in reality, they're threatening it. Just like you said in the opening, this is like 1984. Everything is inverted. One last question. I don't know how familiar you are with the internal politics of the administration in Taiwan, but you have the Democratic Progressive Party. They are the chief enablers of all of this. They are going along with the United States on everything. I don't really see. I don't know what their prospects are in the future. How do you see that one aspect playing out? Because if the DPP was, out next election, let's say, wouldn't that kind of smooth things over a little more, or not?
So Taiwan is U.S. model client state in East Asia, right? There's a reason for that. They have a political system now that's very similar to U.S. They have a two-party system. They have DPP and KMT. And at this point, I think what would be familiar with U.S. listeners is that Taiwan economy is going through a very similar crisis as a lot of the developed economy in the West that all the manufacturing jobs have been offsourced since 1990s to mainland China, and there's an increase. Young people facing an increasingly uncertain economic future. In fact, right now the Taiwan economy is basically held up by its semiconductor sector. Because the Taiwan TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductors, that produce supply the majority of semiconductor to the world. But that even is eroding by U.S. policy, because U.S. has put a sanction on Huawei and preventing TSMC to supply Huawei with semiconductor chips, right? The Chinese companies are perfectly willing to buy semiconductors from Taiwan, but U.S. is saying no, you can't sell those to China, your biggest customer, by the way. And what happened is China is plowing into billions of dollars now, trying to develop its own domestic semiconductor industry. And at the same time, U.S. is also forcing TSMC to divulge its own trade secret, so U.S. can bring the reshore the semiconductor industry back to U.S. That means in 5 to 10 years time frame, Taiwan's competitive edge is going to be gone, and its economy is just gonna get worse. And in such an environment, when youth in Taiwan can't even afford a decent house, which increasingly is priced out of their budget, and when they don't have a bright economic future, all the DPP is doing is playing on the identity politics. Again, instead of trying to fix the economy, which is a hard work, they're trying to play identity politics. And this is how they win elections. Current DPP president Tsai Ing-wen, her approval rating was, in her first term, her approval rating was in single digits. She was on track to lose the election until the Hong Kong protest happened. And during the Hong Kong protest, they really whipped up a media frenzy in Taiwan, trying to whip up fear among the Taiwanese voters, saying, okay, you know what, if China takes over, what's gonna happen. They're gonna put police on the streets, they're gonna crack down on all of you, and that fear mongering strategy actually worked. So Tsai Ing-wen got reelected a second term. That's why she's meeting Nancy Pelosi, and so they will keep on doing that. I mean, they have learned from their mentor from U.S. Fear mongering works, and it's rather than doing the hard work of fixing the economy, developing infrastructure, education, do all those good things. Just play identity politics, and play on people's fear. And I think that, unfortunately, that's a path that Taiwan is going under. And as its opposition party, the KMT, it's at this point it's painted. Another reason for DPP to do this, because KMT has been painted as sort of pro-China party, because they're the ones that are not overtly pro-Taiwan independence, right? Because Taiwan independence is written into the party platform of DPP. Whereas KMT, at least nominally, they still pay lip service to unification with China eventually. So they're painted as the ones that will sell out to Taiwan. Just like how the U.S. parties of both sides are trying to blame each other for selling somehow U.S. interests to China. Same thing is happening in Taiwan. So unfortunately, that dynamic, I don't see a break from that dynamic. It's gonna keep going. I mean, that is why they would play to the Pelosi's visit, because what the Tsai Ing-wen administration is trying to do is they're trying to get the young people to be proud of the Taiwan's international profile getting raised, and so that people can be proud to be Taiwanese. But again, that's to distract them from the economic reality on the island, and this is unfortunately is going to play out right into the hands of the U.S. planners who intend to use Taiwan as a pawn in this game to keep China.
What the DPP is doing is not sustainable. But should we hold our breath and wait for people in Taiwan to see through it, or that you don't think that they're going to?
It's just like U.S. People of Taiwan also have been propagandized for the last 70
Yeah.
years. So unless, you know, I mean, it might be different for the 2 million Taiwanese people who actually work and live on mainland because they could see how China actually functions. But for the rest, I don't know. I mean, like, it's gonna take time. It's gonna take time. I think because right now a lot of the people in Taiwan they actually believe in the U.S. hegemony. They actually thought the U.S. hegemony is good. But it's gonna take time for people that bubble to get bursted. But it will happen eventually. But not anytime soon.
Yeah, and this is a conversation for a whole nother time. But I mean, a lot of people are comparing the situation in Ukraine to the situation in Taiwan. There's obviously major fundamental differences because Taiwan is not a country, Ukraine is. But the way the U.S. is using both as a battering ram against their adversaries is very similar. And hopefully, the people living in Taiwan, they don't have to wait until it becomes that obvious that this is not going to work out that they're being used and it's not going to work out well for them.
I think there's one major difference. I think Ukraine, they have these neo-Nazi parties, these ultra nationalists who are willing to fight. In Taiwan's case, if a fight break out, you're gonna see a lot of them getting on a plane flying to Irvine, to SoCal, so I just don't see the kind of the similar dynamic playing in Taiwan in terms of because people in Taiwan, they're counting on US to fight the battle for them. They didn't know US plan is to fight China to the last Taiwanese, just like they're right now they're fighting Russian to the last Ukrainians. So they it's gonna take time for that to get through to them. But like I said, a lot of people in Taiwan still believe in the idea of US hegemony. I think their bubble will be eventually get bursting in the next 20 years, but it's a long process. It's a long process to reorient yourself. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and just for people watching, just so they understand, the United States invests millions and millions of dollars in the internal political affairs of Taiwan through the National Endowment for Democracy. This was the former head of the NED, Carl Gershman, with Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan. They made the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy as like a franchise of the NED, and that's all they do is pump money into the internal political system, the media, and this is how they're putting this idea into people's heads. This is not an idea that they've arrived at on their own through logic and objective thinking. It's pure propaganda, brainwashing them, just like the U.S. did in Ukraine from 2014 onward, which led to this devastating war that is destroying Ukraine down to the last person, just like you said. And that fully is the plan, at least according to Washington. This is their plan for Taiwan. Use it as a battering ram against China. So this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. I want to thank you, Carl, for taking the time. I hope to have you back on again and frequently if possible. Can you please tell people where to find your work?
Sure. I am, as I said before, I'm a prolific ship poster, so I can be found on Twitter. Just my name, Carl Zha. That's my handle. I also have a YouTube channel, Carl Zha, where I do host similar talks on the situation in China. I also have a podcast, Soak and Steel Podcast, which is more focused on history. Because that's really my passion. I'm a history nerd. So my podcast is really on China, surrounding regions, history, politics, and culture. Currently, I'm doing a series on a retelling of Chinese history, like in chronological order. I'm right now at around 788 BC. So I have a long road to go. And I also have another concurrent series on the Chinese Civil War, the Manchurian Theater, because Chinese Civil War is a big topic. I chose to focus on the Manchuria theater for my series, and a whole bunch of other interesting stuff like the opium trade that including the Golden Triangle that's part of your neighborhood. The northern Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand, and how CIA started the whole drug trade in that region. That's one of my topic as well. So people are welcome to check out. It's on Patreon, so go to patreon.com, search for Silk. My podcast is the first that comes out in this, and that's my main source of income right now. That's how I support my family. So please go check it out, subscribe, and I look forward to interact with all of you on any of these platforms.
And I would definitely highly recommend it, because you're not going to get this kind of information anywhere in the Western media. You have to depend on independent analysts and researchers like Carl to get all of this information. And this is whether you like it or not, it's the truth, and it'll help you make better decisions regarding everything. So once again, thank you, Carl, for joining me, and I hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you, Brian.